Thank you, Ken. That was beautiful. I'm going to read from the Gospel according to John in just a few moments, but before I do, I wanted to sort of set up the background for this particular text, which is obviously one that I think is going to be very familiar to you, but I want to do a little bit more leading up to that, so bear with me for a moment. Last night, as I was anxious and excited and nervous about coming here this morning, my family, and we have an extended family in town, actually, as you probably met maybe before the service, but they invited all of us to go out to dinner, and so we went out to a restaurant. We had a dinner, and part of that was to celebrate my niece Evelyn's birthday, which was last week, and part of it, of course, was in celebration and anticipation of being here this morning, and this new thing that is in my life and is in my family's life of joining Mountain Chapel UMC, and we're excited and grateful to be here. But I was thinking back, and my wife and I were talking about this, and how it's certainly not unique to the Christensen household, but how we mark important milestones in our life, often by gathering around the table and celebrating a meal together. It's not at all unusual for us to go out to a restaurant or to cook a meal of our favorite things and do that as part of our celebration or setup of our time together. And I was thinking back about this. When I graduated from college, right after commencement, my mom, my dad, my two sisters, and I, we took our jam-packed cars full of all of my belongings, and we drove into La Crosse, Wisconsin, the neighboring town, and had dinner at a Cajun restaurant. That was my favorite place to eat in town. And I remember jambalaya is what you eat when you graduate from college. And then when I was ordained, another important milestone in my life, had a lot of family come. We had a special gathering. We had a barbecue luncheon, and lots of people came, and we celebrated that. And again, we broke bread around the table. We were together to celebrate that. The first time I ever met my in-laws, when Eleanor and I were starting to date, this is a well-known family story about us gathering together at a steakhouse in Peoria, Illinois, and I inadvertently ordered the biggest piece of meat that they had on the menu. It hung off the sides of the plate. My father-in-law will be happy to tell you about that story if you'd like to know more. But as I was thinking about what it means to join you on this particular day, I mean, what's significant about coming together for worship as our first time to be together as pastor and congregation on July 2nd? And it is represented by the fact that in this church and so many others, on the first Sunday of the month, we celebrate an important thing when we come together. And today we mark another important milestone in the life of our church family in gathering around this table and celebrating this meal and the sacrament. And I can't think of a more powerful, a more profound, or more appropriate way for us to begin our time together and all that the future will hold than by gathering around Christ's table and breaking the bread and sharing the cup and saying, this is where we begin. This sets the tone now for our ministry going forward. Proud past, excited present as they may be, we also now set the tone by breaking bread in this meal for the future and all that is to come. So, as I said, this church is certainly not unique in the fact that we have communion on the first Sunday of the month. That's a pretty typical thing that you'd find in many of our sister churches as well. And one of the things that tends to happen as we have communion on the first Sunday of the month is we have a worship service, and then sometimes inadvertently we sort of slip communion in. I mean, it just sort of gets put there. Oh, it's that Sunday again, so we have communion. And it's not that we seek to do that in any kind of way that doesn't bring reverence to what we're doing, but it just sort of becomes one of those things that we say, okay, we need to put that into the service. But as I was reading the communion story, or the story of the Last Supper again, particularly out of John's Gospel, I was recognizing the fact that this is really the middle part of the story. You see, there's the things that happen before the meal and after the meal, which, at least according to the way that John tells the story, are very important also for setting the tone for what the meal really represents and signifies and what the disciples are called to do in the midst of that moment. And so if we go and we read just a little bit early, if we start at the beginning of the 13th chapter of John, we'll see that the story begins with something else entirely. And that is Jesus gathering his disciples in the upper room to partake in this Passover celebration, and before they even break bread, this is what happens. From the 13th chapter of the Gospel according to John. Now before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table. He took off his outer robe, and he tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus answered, "You do not know what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you will have no share of me." Simon Peter then said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew that the one who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." Now after he had washed their feet, he put on his robe and returned to the table. He said to them, "Do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord. And if you are right, for that is what I am. So if you, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I do. Very truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." You've probably heard this said in sermons before. Preachers are often trying to relate this important message about the fact that sometimes the things that we read in the Bible would have been something that wouldn't have needed additional explanation to people in the first century. Some of the customs, of course, at that time are foreign to us now. We don't need to, for instance, wash our feet every time we enter a home. And so this story, while it's surprising in many ways even to us, wouldn't have been as surprising to the disciples. You see, it was very commonplace, and again, you've probably heard this before, but every time you would enter into a guest's home, or into a host's home, and you would be invited there as the guests, you would be provided with some kind of wash basin, and you'd have the opportunity to wash off your feet. Of course, you'd probably be wearing, if you could afford them, you'd be wearing sandals of some kind of footwear, and yet still grime from the road and the countryside gets on your feet. Mud, dirt, garbage, animal waste, you name it. If it's out there, it's going to get on your feet at some point. And so it was a custom that every time you would enter into somebody's house, that they would give you a basin to wash your feet. Now, if you were to go into the home of somebody who had the means to actually afford a servant or multiple servants, then it was occasionally the job of the servant to wash the feet of the guests. Every time in the first century that foot washing would take place, it would be automatically related to or synonymous with the idea of hospitality, and that you are being welcomed into somebody's home. It was a mi casa, su casa type of thing. If you had your feet washed, you knew that you were welcomed as an honored guest, and that the home you were now in was as much your own as it was to those who owned it. So you were welcomed in that place. Now, to some of you, I've already said this morning, but way back in March, it seems like a very long time ago now, announcement was made that I was going to be appointed to this church along with all of the other pastors that were appointed to other churches in our annual conference. And it seems like a long time ago now, but it wasn't 1 week before I experienced the hospitality of the Staff Parish Relations Committee, who invited me to come to a meeting that very next week. for a time of introduction, for a time of getting to know each other a little bit. We had a nice meeting together, and we did some business, but it was mostly a time of low-key, just getting to know each other. Then it wasn't too long before I was invited to serve on a search committee for the upcoming youth director, and I met a wonderful group of people who helped with that process. Then I started getting emails from some of you who just emailed me out of the blue and tracked me down on an email address and said, "We're so excited that you are coming, and we want to welcome you in, and we just want you to know that we're praying for you in advance and in expectation of your arrival." And then I got a card from a Monday morning group here that meets at the church, and they sent a card to my home, and it just said the same thing. "We're excited to meet you and your family. We're praying for you. We're so excited for all that is in store." And I tell you this to let you know that I have experienced the kind of hospitality from you already that says, "You have welcomed me into your church home." You have extended me the kind of hospitality that says, "We are excited that you are here. We're grateful that you're coming to us, and we are eager to be in ministry with you." And I want to tell you how deeply my family and I appreciate that. Not every church does that. Not everybody goes to the effort to send a message or to make a phone call or to write a card. Not every class does that. Not every staff leaves a gift on my desk and a plant for me. I notice those things, I appreciate them, and I want to tell you that I have experienced your hospitality, and you have welcomed me into your church family, and just as importantly, you have welcomed me into this church home, this home of Christ, but this home for all of you as well. And thank you so much for that. So before we begin our meal, I want to tell you that I have already experienced that we have set the tone for that hospitality piece in preparation for the meal, as you have received me as a guest and as one of you. But the story continues. See, there's the other part of the foot washing that is the part that's the more scandalous part, right? The part that the disciples are already uneasy about what's taking place here. I mean, remember now that these young men have decided that they are going to give their lives to Jesus. They are going to follow him. They're going to follow him as teacher and rabbi, as mentor. And this is even before they have acknowledged him as Lord. So they're following him. They appreciate him. They understand him. They have left behind their trade. They have left behind their homes. They have left behind their families, and sometimes at great cost. And yet they have done this following the conviction of their heart that God has led them in this. And Jesus has said now to them, as he has gathered them for the Passover celebration, they're expecting him to take the role of the host, of the leader. I mean, who's better to share that story and to break the bread with them than Jesus Christ? But before he does the unthinkable, and he drops to his knees and he washes their feet, the thing that only a servant would do. Peter can't handle it. "I'm not going to let you touch my feet." And Jesus looks at him and says, "Oh, yes, you are. Because if you don't, you're having no part of me." Peter, not for the first time, doesn't quite get it, but he goes along with it. And then Jesus stops, he kneels, and he washes each one of their feet, taking the time to do that. And the towel that he has been wearing around him, he has now dried their feet with in preparation for the meal. Jesus recognizes and teaches his disciples in this moment that in order to be a leader, in order to follow what God has placed on his heart and the calling that he has placed on his life, he must demonstrate to the disciples that he is a servant among them. For all of the wonderful responsibility and authority and privilege that clergy are extended in the church today, there is ultimately the bottom line that we are called to be servants. And I stand before you humbled, warmly welcomed, but humbled with the responsibility of knowing that I have been appointed here by God and our bishop to be your servant and to serve among you. And I am eagerly expecting great things from our time together. I'm expecting that we're going to get to be part of the greatest celebrations of each other's lives. I am so thrilled to be there for that opportunity when you welcome a child into your family, or when your child or grandchild is baptized here at the font. I'm excited to be here for the weddings. I'm excited to be here every time we break bread for communion. I'm excited to preach on Christmas Eve. I'm excited to celebrate the resurrection with you on Easter Sunday. I'm eager to pray with you in my office. I'm eager to come to your homes and to be with you during your times of celebration. And I'm also going to be your servant when it comes to coming to your bedside at the hospital. And for those times when things feel like they're falling apart, I'm going to be there to listen and to pray. For those times that we study and go through something difficult in a book that we're reading, or try to figure out that conundrum in the Scriptures, I'm going to be there with you for that. And I'm eager to be a servant among you. And I don't take that responsibility lightly. I'm profoundly grateful for it. But as I said, I'm humbled as well. But there's a catch. Jesus gets to his feet, and then he says to them, what? Now you do it. I have showed you what it means to be the servant. I have showed you what it means to be obedient to God. And now it's your turn. And I know that this is not something new for all of you. I know that this is just continuing a long tradition and a legacy in this church of being proud servants to serve their Creator and their Lord Jesus Christ and to serve one another. But when Jesus tells the disciples that they don't have to just, that they should do this for one another, he's not talking about just in the room, is he? He's talking about those beyond the walls. And that's what we're called to do as the church also. So when we think about our servanthood here at Mountain Chapel, it's not just in us, it's in us and everyone else too. And so it's a ministry that we're a part of that started long before us. And I'm grateful personally for all that Pastor David did and the groundwork he laid to prepare the way for my coming in to make this transition as smooth as possible for me. I'm grateful for Pastor Tom and all that he did in the years before that in growing this church into the thriving congregation that it is, and all of those who came before them. And I am so honored to be a part of that legacy of clergy here at this church. But it's also on all of us to embrace that role of servants and to take part in that. Because then what Jesus does is after he washes their feet and he demonstrates servanthood to all of them, and he tells them that they have to do this for each other and for the world, then they share the meal. Then they're signifying something because, like special meals in our own families and our own traditions, it signifies that something else is still coming. It's about the past and it's about the present, but there's also a future-oriented component to what he's doing. And in John's Gospel, the 13th chapter ends with Jesus saying, and one more thing. I give you today a new commandment. This is not something that's a take it or leave it. This is a new commandment, a new mandate, and he says simply this, that you love one another. That you love one another. I'm so thrilled to be with you today. I've been looking forward to this. I've been praying for you just as you have been praying for me and my family. And today we come together acknowledging what has been, celebrating what is, and excited for what is yet to come. And we'll do so knowing that we do so with hearts of servants, filled with this commandment and mandate to love one another. And we signify that, and symbolically that is represented in the fact that first we pause and break bread.